Okay, great. Me too. Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our final class in our series, Community, Pluralism, and Difference in Halakhic Practice with Rabbi Dr. Alex Ozar. That might have been the first time I got it right on the first try. My last chance.
Amazing.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I think you've all been here before, so I'll just go through this really quickly. I'm promoting people to be panelists. That doesn't require anything of you. It just means that if you want to, you'll be able to turn on your cameras, and we'd love to see your faces. And you'll also be able to raise your hands to ask questions. If you don't want to do that, or if you're watching on Facebook, you're welcome to put questions in the comments, and I will pass those on. And I will also be putting the source sheets in the comments in case anyone wants to to follow with the sources independently. And yeah, we just ask that you keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. And I think that's about it. I think you all know the drill. So thank you so much for being here for the past couple months. And thank you so much, Rabbi Ozar. And enjoy it while it lasts. I'm very excited.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much to everybody for being here on this wild journey of ours. It was too short. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. Thank you to Faya for your thank you again at the end, but thank you for your extraordinary stewardship and fine MC skills. And thank you to Drisha as always. There's more material on this topic than we could possibly cover. Even if you doubled the series length, we'd still wouldn't be barely scratching the surface. But we are going to bring this to a close. And I wanted to, in the last few weeks, we've done a fair amount of fairly high theory, like high level, fairly abstract conceptions of charity and generosity and justification we might give more or less stuck out to think about how those we disagree with, maybe doing so out of a kind of sincerity or good intentions. Maybe we can construct difference in ways that don't lead to enmity, or can at least leave open the possibility of community and even friendship. Tonight, I want to think less on the big picture abstraction and conceptual abstraction, and more on the level of just interpersonal ethics, how to actually, or just the ethics may even itself be too abstract. I think that just the actual mechanics, the nuts and bolts of carrying on in relationship with people that we have deep disagreements about deep things with. And this is going to come back to recall our first session. I started with the Tshuva from Moshe Feinstein. If you remember, he was addressing this difficult set of cases where elderly fathers in the Soviet Union in the 20s and 30s were stuck with living with their secular communist daughters or daughters-in-law, and they just had no way to feed themselves independently without relying on their daughters or daughter-in-law to cook for them and buy the food for them. And so Moshe was having to figure out, just in this very real, visceral isn't quite the right word, but just this very just flesh and bones kind of way, how does a father deal with the challenge of pluralism when it's his daughter and it's a question of how is he going to eat at the dining room table? So come back to that kind of frame, that kind of problem. And I'm going to offer 2 to 3, depending on how you categorize them. I think really 3. Just further models, fairly basic models, actually like pretty common sense models for thinking about doing this work and approaching these problems constructively. And then the third really will end with a more properly rabbinic drasha. If we were in shul, I actually have given this as a drasha a few times. I think it'll be appropriate for an ending. So with my throat appropriately cleared, let's embark on our final voyage here tonight. Pull up the source sheet. And we get to learn some Yevamos together. Yevamos is a ton of fun. So Yibum is the biblical concept elaborated upon Chazal. The idea is that, let's say you have two brothers, and the way you do this in Talmudic rabbinic parlance is, so it's you use the names of the Shvatim, the sons of Yaakov, and then the wives of Yaakov. So the men in the story are going to be Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, and the women are going to be Rachel and Leah. So Reuven is married to Shimon. Sorry, Reuven and Shimon are both are there. Yos is impossible, and I highly recommend using charts. Reuven is married to Rachel. Shimon is married to Leah. Shimon dies. The funeral is very sad. The question is, if Shimon dies without children, he's left childless and has no one to carry on his name. So the halacha is that Leah, the wife of the widow of Shimon, so Reuven then has the option of marrying Leah. And it seems like it's a mitzvah. They ought to do this. Some thought later that like maybe this isn't the best idea. Maybe we prefer they not try this because maybe it requires a level of spiritual and moral refinement to be entering into marital union with your brother's widow, that your deceased brother's widow. We want to make sure you have the right intentions. But if you just read the Torah's account, it seems like this is what we want you to do. I want Reuven to marry Leah, the wife of Reuven's brother Shimon, former deceased brother, so as to have children with her and then carry on the brother's name. And then if either party refuses, they just don't want to do this. So then there's a kind of divorce ceremony that's specific to the Yibum relationship. Where instead of standard divorce, you write a document, or there's a ceremony involving a shoe, and there's a certain recitation done in front of the court, and this sets the woman free to remarry. So they're like kind of quasi-married, even just as soon as Shimon dies, they're in this kind of almost proto-marital relationship, Reuven and Leah, and then Leah can't marry anyone else until they've done either Yibum or Chalitza. But then if they do Chalitza, she can go first. And go marry whoever she wants. Now, to make it more fun, let's say a concept of sarot. So in biblical law and in early rabbinic law, men can marry as many women as they want. In the Gemara, it strongly recommends that men not marry more than 4 wives. It's too much, gets too complicated, and at the very least, you need to make sure you have enough money, a large enough estate that you can support the number of wives that you plan on taking on. This becomes like a very clear awareness already in the Chazal, and then through the early literature, that this could get complicated and sticky, and then this gets fully prescribed or largely prescribed in the 11th century, and it gets largely accepted that we stop doing this. But at the time, it was totally normal to have men with multiple wives. So let's say, so you've got Reuven and Shimon is married to Leah, as I marry Rachel and Leah is Reuven's daughter. So Shimon married his niece. Now, and I'm sorry I don't have charts. So on one view, this is the view of Beit Hillel, which we're going to see in a second. The view of Beit Hillel is that because Reuven obviously can't do Yibum with his daughter, because that's prohibited quite strictly. So again, there's Reuven, Shimon, and Reuven doesn't have any wives, and Shimon dies, leaving behind Rachel and Leah. Leah is Reuven's daughter. So Reuven can't do Yibum with Leah. That's obvious. Everybody agrees to that. The question is, may Reuven do Yibum with Rachel, who's unrelated? So Beit Hillel's view is that, and all when you have multiple women married to the same man, so they're referred to as tsarot. So it's often translated as co-wives. Here I see the Sfaria translation has rival wives. It comes from the word tsara, is like tsar v'oyev in the Megillah, an enemy, like rivals and just characters of enmity. But so I think rival wives is a good translation. So the question is, are the tsarot the co-wives, the rival wives of the arayot, the people who are directly prohibited to the potential yavam? Are they allowed to marry the other women who are married to their brother? So again, Reuven, Shimon is married to Rachel and Leah. Leah is prohibited to Reuven. Shimon dies, does Reuven do Yibum with Shimon? In this Mishnah, as you'll see, Beit Shammai matirin hatzarot la'achim. They say that the rival wives can marry the brothers. So Reuven is allowed to marry Rachel. That's good. He should do that. Even though Leah is his daughter and Rachel is the co-wife of his daughter, he can still go ahead and marry Rachel, and that's what should happen. Beis Hillel Osrim, they say you can't. They say because one of the rival wives is prohibited to him, the whole thing is off. And so the other woman, Leah, just can remarry whoever she wants. She doesn't even require chalitza. She's not eligible. She's not an eligible candidate. Okay, now this has an interesting implication. Chaltzu, let's say they do the they go ahead with the chalitza ceremony and the quasi divorce ritual, and he does this with Rachel, the woman who, and on Beis Shammai's view, he can do yibum with, and on Beis Hillel's view, he cannot do yibum with. So now, again, more background you need to know. A woman who receives a divorce may not marry a Kohen subsequently. And at least rabbinically, a woman who receives chalitza also can't marry a Kohen. So the question is, if Rachel does chalitza, can she marry a Kohen afterwards? And the question is the chalitza real? Does it mean anything? Because on Beis Hillel's view, the chalitza is meaningless. They can't do yibum. They're not allowed to marry, and so they don't need chalitza. And so they could do chalitza for fun, but it's just a show and has no legal effect or meaning. And so it does not render her prohibited to marry a Kohen. But for Beis Shammai, because they actually could marry, Beis Shammai Matir and Ozar Lachin, the chalitza is meaningful, and thus they, if they do chalitza, she's prohibited to a Kohen. So Beis Shammai Posli Minakuna, they say that it's she cannot marry a Kohen because the chalitza is real. Beis Hillel Mashir, they say it's fine because it was meaningless. Nitziamu, if they actually go ahead and do marry. So Beis Shammai Machshirim, they say everything's fine because that's what was supposed to happen. Beis Hillel Poslin, they say that the child of the marriage is a mamzer. Mamzer is the child of an illicit marriage. Debates about which kinds of illicit marriages, but the claim here is that this is significant enough. You're not allowed to marry this woman. If you do marry her and they do have children, then the children are mamzerim, and they can't marry anyone subsequently. So like extremely high stakes. And then the Mishnah says something extraordinary. Af al pi she'elu osrin ve'elu matirin. Even though these prohibit and these permit. There are certain situations where Beis Shammai says the marriage can happen, Beis Hillel says it can't, and vice versa. Elu poslin ve'elu mashirin, there are individuals of whom Beis Hillel will say that these are mamzer, and Beis Shammai will say they are not. Lo nimnu Beis Shammai milisa nashim mi Beis Hillel. They neither v'lo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai, neither group refused to marry men and women from the other group. This is despite the fact, and again, on Ayer's view, so like Beis Shammai would need to worry if they have Kohanim in their group, they need to worry that some of Beis Hillel's people are Psulin L'Kahuna, and that wasn't marked as such, because on Beis Hillel would pretend that a chalitza that happened didn't mean anything, whereas according to Beis Shammai it did. And Beis Shammai will have mamzerim that Beis Hillel doesn't, that recognizes, but Beis Shammai doesn't. And so they're taking a substantial risk of transgression in marrying in between the communities and allowing these like interdenominational marriages, intergroup marriages. Nonetheless, it says that despite the risk of transgression, or what seems like the risk of transgression, they did not refuse to marry in between the groups. And just in general, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagreed about a lot in ritual law. There were a lot of things where Beis Shammai said things were impure and Beis Hillel said they were pure, and a few things vice versa. They didn't stop themselves or refuse to trust each other when they were working with food and keeping it pure. They would help each other out, despite the fact that on Beis Hillel's view or Beis Shammai's view, Beis Hillel was doing things that were obviously over the line. So just to like, you imagine people with very different kashrut standards being happy to eat at each other's house and work in each other's kitchens, despite the fact that they have very different So that's the that's what's at stake here. And then the most dramatic thing at stake here is the mamzer question. That there are women that Beis Hillel say are absolutely invalid for, and men, the people that absolutely you cannot marry because they're the children of illicit marriages. And so it seems like they're just saying something quite radical. It just on the first reading, it seems like they're just saying, all right, we disagree about this in theory, but in practice, let's just let it go. At least not be, we're not going to be particular about it. And that is obviously not going to fully make it through the Gemara's conceptual gauntlet, and I think it's right. It shouldn't. But I did want us to sit with the fact that just the Mishnah does sound like that. Like it's all just fine. And you imagine like a group of Jews, we keep Shabbos, you don't keep Shabbos, and it's all fine. Something like that. We do say that sometimes. All right. So now the Gemara, commenting on this Mishnah, goes through an extended debate about the question of whether it's phrased as whether asu beis Shammai kedivrei hemelo. Does beis Shammai actually follow their own rules? And it's not a question of whether beis Shammai felt self-confident enough in their opinions. The question is that it's like we all know that Beis Hillel wins and carries the day, and the Gemara elsewhere tells a story about a bat kol, which is a fascinating subtopic for another time, a heavenly voice that rings out and informs everyone that the halacha follows Beis Hillel. And so it seems like everyone should follow Beis Hillel, including Beis Shammai. But there is a view that this goes both ways. So I'm not sure, depending on how much time I want to spend on it, I will read every word here, but it is a lot of fun. And this is already just a snippet of the entire passage. So Mia Svarat Asu Beis Shammai Kidvrehem. Could you really say that Beis Shammai followed their own opinions? No, they obviously followed Beis Hillel opinions. Lo Asu Beis Shammai Kidvrehem. They did not. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asu Basu. He says, yes, they did. That's Rabbi Yochanan's view. And this parallels the debate between the later sages, Rabbi Shmuel, Rav Omer, Lo Asu Beis Shammai Kidivrehem. They say that Beis Shammai did not follow their own rulings. Shmuel Omer Asu Basu. He says they absolutely did. Amos. So when? Hold on. Ilema. It's fun enough. We're just going to read through it. Ilema Kodem Baskol. If you say it was before the heavenly voice rang out, informing everyone that the halacha follows Beis Hillel, my time at demand damer lo asu. So then how could anyone hold that they didn't follow their own rulings? If it's before everybody was informed that the halacha follows Beis Hillel, so why wouldn't they? Of course they follow their own rulings. They believe them. So then it's after the heavenly voice told everyone that the halacha follows Beis Hillel. My time in demand damer asu. But then you have the problem on the other end. How could anyone hold that they did follow their own rulings after having told them that they shouldn't? See, okay, so we can construct this on either horn of the dilemma. See, if you want to say it was prior to the bat kol informing everybody the halacha follows Beis Hillel, could go on to Beis Hillel Ruba. So we're talking about a situation where a point in time when the Hillel school was more popular, they had a higher enrollment. And because they had a higher enrollment at Beit Hillel, they had the majority. And so at that period, the halacha followed Beis Hillel, despite the fact that there was no heavenly voice indicating as such. And so that's why Beis Shammai didn't follow their own view, because they said, look, we believe in what we believe in, but we're the minority. L'man damar lo asu, Jaha Beis Hillel Ruba. So, right. So if you hold that they didn't follow their own view, it's because Beis Hillel was the majority. L'man damar asu, kiyazlin basa Ruba. They say no. So if Beis Hillel were the majority and Beis Shammai still followed their own rulings, why was that? Because when do we follow the majority? They say, that is when they are of equivalent stature and equivalent aptitude. But here, despite the fact that Beis Shammai was in the minority, they were smarter. And so Beis Shammai says, we know we're fewer in number, but we're better. And the reason, in fact, this Gemara doesn't say this, but I'm reconstructing it. The reason why they have a lower enrollment is because they have higher standards. It's a more competitive application process. So it's pretty exactly why they say, like, that's exactly the point. We're a more elite group. Okay. The by same, this is a lot of, so we're just gonna go through it. Is like, you don't always get this like pure, we call the shakal v'tarya, the back and forth in the Gemara. Just this like, it's really pretty. The by same if you say it's after the voice came out, mandamar lo asu, so if it's after the heavenly voice came out, informing everybody that the halacha follows Beis Hillel, so those who say that Beis Shammai did not follow their own rulings, then obviously, because there was a batkel, mandamar asu, Rabbi Yeshua so if they say that they did follow their own rulings despite the batkel, so it's the view of Rabbi Yeshua that ein mashkichin batkel, because Rabbi Yeshua says we don't care what the heavenly voice says; it's just some detached voice from nowhere, and like no reason to think it's authoritative. But now while we're having fun, so there's a Woody Allen story. It's about the Akedah, and the story is the morning after God comes to Abraham and he says, Abraham, what on earth were you thinking? What was that? Trying to sacrifice your kid? And Abraham says, but didn't thou command me to do it? And God is like, no, I never said it. He said, what are you talking about? And Abraham says, but I heard a deep, loud voice. Dost thou listen to every deep, loud voice thou hears? Anyway, it's a silly Woody Allen joke, but there's a serious element here. Where Yeshua says, just because you hear a voice that sounds like it's from heaven, that doesn't mean it's actually from heaven. Okay. Umandam or asu, those who say that they did follow their own rules. Now, this we actually saw earlier in another session. Karinan kan lo go to do. I'll slow down a little bit. Hold on. If Beis Shammai were following their own rulings, then doesn't that mean that they were violating the injunction against breaking into parties? Lo teasu agudot agudot. It's a reading of the original verse, lo go to do. It means you shouldn't lacerate yourself, you shouldn't cut yourself. It's a prohibition against excessive mourning rituals. But Chazal read it as you shouldn't break yourself, to cut yourself as a community into multiple groups. And so this is taken as a prohibition against individual communities having multiple practices within them. And seems like a prohibition against just communal fragmentation in general. And so how could it be that Beis Shammai would follow their own rulings, despite the fact that Beis Hillel was always, you could ask the same question in reverse. How could Beis Hillel follow their own rulings if Beis Shammai was doing their thing? They should have all had to come to some consensus. So Amar Abaye, he says, Ki amrin lotis go to do. When do we say that principle that you can't have multiple practices? Kagon shtei bat dinim be'ir acha. Halal umorim k'divrei Beis Shammai, halal umorim k'divrei Beis Hillel. It's a problem when you have two courts within the same city. One court follows, for example, one court follows the rulings of Beis Shammai, one court follows the rulings of Beis Hillel. Aval, but shtei batei dinim b'shtei arayot leitlan ba. If you have two courts in two different cities, then it's not a problem. The problem, as Abaye puts it, is like within the same geographical location. There, if you have two competing courts, so that's an affront to Jewish solidarity and Jewish communities. Is that everyone in the same town needs to figure out how to get along. You can only have, in one town, there's only enough room for one set of institutions, one set of practices. There's partly the positive need for communal unity within the city, and negatively also, I just think the expressive meaning of there being divergent practices within the same geographical location is more upsetting and more an affront to the ideal of Jewish unity than, all right, so like in New York, they do one thing, in New Jersey, they do a different thing, nobody really notice. Or it's not as flagrant, not as flagrantly in opposition to the ideal of Jewish unity. Amalei Rava, he says back, he says, hold on. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were not in separate cities. I don't know if they were right across the street. I don't know how they may have. Maybe they shared a building. Sometimes it seems like they were in the same base medrash. I don't know what the deal was exactly. But they're definitely not in two separate cities. So that solution doesn't work. Ella Amarava Kiamarino just go based in Beir Achat. Plagmor Beishai, Plagmor and He says, no, it's within the same city, it's fine. Especially there are big cities. I live here in New Haven. We don't have that many Jews, but we've got like 10 shoals. It's a lot of different things, a lot of different practices. It's and that's fine. He says we saw this in the context of the shul breakaway question. So, like, yeah, I mean, every city has lots of different shuls with lots of different practices and lots of different ways of doing things. So he says, like, it's a problem if within the same, not within the same geographical location, but within the same communal institution, with the same court, if they don't have consensus. He says it's a problem of intracommunal Jewish leadership, which is issues in a problem for communal solidarity if there is if the leadership lacks consensus. That's bad, and that needs to be fixed. You can't have, if you got 3 rabbis in the shul, you can't have one rabbi doing one thing and the other rabbi's doing the other thing. It doesn't work that way. But if you have 2 courts in the same city, no problem. Okay, so this is all fun background. I want to introduce the debate about whether Beis Shammai follows their own rulings, and I think also the Lotus Goju thing is a good thing to just remember, keep fresh. This idea of, again, when is it more or less important for us to maintain conformity of practice? And the claim is either within the city or within the shul or within the court, something like that. It is very important and it is very problematic to do it. But then if you can set up parallel institutions, it might be totally fine, may even be great, may even be wonderful. Maybe we are expanding the possibility of doing Jewish life and expanding its richness precisely through facilitating its diversity. And sometimes separate but not equal, but here it's separate, but not just equal. You're allowing growth, and you're allowing development of richness of Jewish practice precisely through division and breakaways. But okay. So now later on, in the same passage, I skipped some stuff for us so we can get through it. So again, now they cite the Mishnah we saw earlier as a proof. Say, hold on. It says that Beis Hillel would marry the women from Beis Shammai, the men, vice versa, and it just Chazal's mind, they're depicting the males as the agents. But the men and women from Beis Shammai would marry the men and women from Beis Hillel, and vice versa. And so, if that's true, that they married between the groups, if you say that Beis Shammai didn't follow their own rules, that's why they were able to marry. So then it was just a question of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel having weird opinions from the other's perspective. So Beis Hillel thinks that Beis Shammai has a bunch of weird views on stuff. And Beis Shammai thinks that Beis Hillel has a bunch of weird views on stuff. But no big deal. You know, like you realize, like, we're conservative, they're liberal, you know, we're Mets fans, they're Yankees fans. It's upsetting, it's offensive, it's hurtful, it's hard. Thanksgiving is really challenging, but, you know, we'll be all right. Maybe we'll just steer clear of the Sarot Lach and an Yibum conversation at the dining room table until we feel comfortable. And then, you know, Uncle Larry gets drunk and starts going on about how Beis Hillel is allowing all these horrible marriages, and it turns into a whole mess. But okay, that's fine. But hold on. If you think that Beis Shammai actually did follow their rulings, which means that they were allowing marriages that Beis Hillel thinks results in mamzerim, amai lo nimnu. And where it says, hold on, how could it possibly be that they didn't refuse to marry between the groups? Bishlama Beis Shammai Beis Hillel lo nimnu. So okay, fine. Maybe in that direction. The Beis Shammai didn't have that much to worry about. Because the prohibition of a Kohen marrying a woman who'd received chalitza, like, not that big a deal. Ela Beis Hillel Beis Shammai amai lo nimku. But in that direction, B'nai Chayav Krisos Mamzer Aram Nidhu. We're talking about the real thing. This is completely prohibited. Maybe you don't get an actual mamzer from marrying the rival wife of somebody you can't marry, and so then I'm not gonna do all the jargon here, but to somebody who's only prohibited to you as a level of great spiritual excision, but you don't get the death penalty for it, so maybe it's not as severe. But even though they disagreed about that, but they clearly all agree that this counts as a mamzer. And so here the Gemara concludes it must be that Beis Shammai didn't follow their own rules. Because if they did, there's no way they'd be able to marry in between the groups. Because it's not just a question of the other group having weird views or bad opinions. It's that there were actually real religious risks of transgression and severe transgression. And there's no way they'd be able to have an intermarrying community if that were the case. And so, as I said, the Mishnah at face value makes it seem like very simple and happy and easy. Like, despite their deep disagreements, they all got along, and it was wonderful. And they all married each other's kids. Their kids all married each other. But the Gemara points out there's a real analytic problem here that can't quite be right. Because at the end of the day, there are standards. And you can't just say, well, everything's fine. It's no big deal. We disagree about really fundamental things. And I think the things you're doing are completely transgressive and wrong, but no big deal. No, it is a big deal. And no community can survive if you don't draw lines, you don't maintain your own standards. And if you get yourself, especially if you get yourself entangled in complicated commitments, when all of a sudden you have to compromise on your standards and things that matter most, then your entire identity goes out the window and you're done. So the Gemara says that can't be right. So what must be going on? So first the Gemara says, well, no, that just wasn't what was happening. We're just talking about a case where they had bad views, but nobody was actually doing the things, doing these things in practice. Then the Gemara says, no. Well, we olam asu. No, they were doing it. So how'd they marry? Demodi lahu parshi. They just told each other, and then they would marry. Beis Shammai would say if there was going to be a shidduch between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and so the Beis Hillel young man was going to marry, potentially was going to marry a young woman from Beis Shammai. The shadchan or whoever else would say, oh no, she's an amazing girl, but we know that according to our view, she's totally perfect. According to your view, there's a problem, because according to your view, she's the child of an illicit marriage. And so don't marry her. You know, she'll marry somebody else, she'll marry somebody else, she'll marry somebody within Beis Shammai, and we think she's amazing, so everyone will be fine. But the point is that they trusted each other, and they trusted each other specifically to engage in proactive, open communication. They knew they not only had different views, they had radically different practices, and they had different practices which had like potentially massively transgressive implications for either side. But despite that fact, they wanted to continue intermarrying and remaining the same community. And the mechanism for that was that they developed enough just personal trust that they knew that the one group would never allow the other group to fall into what the other group thought of as a transgression. They would never let them sin. And so then, right, you imagine just it's something much more familiar, you know, just two families with just very different kashrut standards. Even construct a case where family A is very machmir, you know, family A keeps only Chalav Yisrael, and family B keeps only Pas Yisrael, and not vice versa. So you can imagine a case where they would say, well, they just can't eat together because they each are strict about something that the other one isn't. You could also imagine a case, and this hopefully the way it would be, that, well, we love each other, we want to be able to dine together, and so we will just trust each other, that when we go to each other's houses, neither of us would ever serve the other group something we wouldn't like. It's something that they would be upset if they found out. And that would be a transgression according to their view. So this, and it requires, it's on both ends. It requires that proactive sensitivity to know what the person on the other side is going to be worried about and to care about and be sensitive to it and attend to those sensitivities. And then it requires trust on the other side to be able to believe that the person actually would take those sensitivities into account. Okay, the next piece is going to be a lot shorter, but I'm going to pause here. Are there any thoughts, questions about that the last event here? So the first just like method of pluralism, community cross difference I wanted to offer tonight was just the idea of, yes, we have differences. We're not gonna solve them, but at least under the right conditions, maybe we can carry on the work of community and togetherness even through marriage. Our children marry each other. So long as we are just upfront and clear and sensitive and caring and respectful precisely with regard to those differences. We say, I know you hold the wrong views and I know they're wrong, but I know that you hold them and I know that you mean it and you're sincere. And I want you to know that I would never let you transgress your principles. And I know that you wouldn't allow me to do that either. And so we can continue marrying each other, or we can continue being in the same shul together or in the same community, or we can continue eating at each other's houses, or we can continue being friends because I know you would never pressure me to go over the line. I know you would never do anything that would compromise my principles. Okay. There's this Mishnah shows up in a couple different versions, a couple different places. I really love it, and it's even more. It's a little more textured, fine-grained, and also it feels a little more spiritually riskier / more ambitious, and I think it was correspondingly quite powerful in both directions. So here's the story. Mashelet isha l'chaverta, a woman can lend to her friend, hashuda al hashvi'it, who is suspect with regard to seventh year produce. So Shemitah produce, anything grown in the seventh year, you're allowed to eat it. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally kosher. But there's a requirement, complicated right now, that once when you you can harvest the stuff. You can't work the ground, but you can harvest the produce that grows, bring it home. But once the relevant species is no longer present out in the fields, you're obligated to get rid of it from the house, eliminate it from the house. So once the apples are done growing, there are no apples out in the orchards, you need to get all the apples out of your house. Debates about exactly what that entails. So there's a worry, like you just don't generally know whether this woman has taken care to make sure that the produce that she's using is kosher in this respect. So, but it says it's totally fine to lend her a nafa, ukvara, v'rechaim v'tanur. You can lend her a sifter, a sieve, a hand mill, or an oven. You can lend her kitchen implements. She comes over and she does this all the time, right? And you go over to her place and say, hey, can I borrow a spatula? Can I borrow a pot? You have some sugar? And of course the answer is yes, but now it's the seventh year and now I know she's not so firm about Shemitah produce. And now I say, look, if I lend her my kitchen implements, then won't I be complicit? Won't I be facilitating her transgression of working with this illicit produce? And isn't that a stain on me? Won't I be getting my hands dirty? And the Mishnah seems to just say, no, it's totally fine. Lend her the thing. Don't worry about what she's going to use it for. Okay. Aval, but lo tavor v'lo titchani. You can't sift or grind with her. So I love both sides of this. So on the one hand, it says, look, it's not your job to police your neighbor. most of the time. And okay, you suspect she's going to do something wrong with the kitchen implements. Not your problem. And positively, this is going to be made explicit. We want you to be lending things to your neighbor. That's just a good, nice, normal, healthy thing to do. We don't want these religious standards to be a reason why your relationship with your neighbor is degraded or forfeited. You should continue to have a good, active, friendly, kind relationship with the people you live next to. That's important. It's vital. And so if they ask you for a pot, you don't need to ask any questions about what they're going to do with the pot. Just give them the pot. It's fine. But now, okay, she says, can you come over and help me do the grinding? And there you have to say, look, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to be mean. I don't mean to be judgy. But I know we have different standards. And I'm very particular. In our family, we're very careful about shvis and shmita produce. And so, I'm sorry, I think I would rather not do it with my own hands. Or even better, you just come up with an excuse. You just say, I'm so sorry, I can't do it right now. I'm busy. I got to take care of the kids. I got to go drive carpool, whatever it is. You find some way to say, I just can't do that. So there's a threshold where up to that threshold, we say we want you to turn a blind eye and just carry on good neighborly relations. But there's also a line. When you hit that line, it's red and it says you just don't do it. You just don't participate actively. And that's the line, is active participation. You can support it, you can facilitate it even, right? You're making it possible for her to do it, and that's fine. You don't do it yourself. That's too much, because once you start doing it yourself, that will undermine your own commitment to your own standards, your own ideals. And that will be damaging. And we don't want that to happen. So I love this balance. And then so it does it again. So Eshet Chaver, Mashelet le Eshet Amaretz Nafakbar. So we met the Chaver and the Amaretz before. The Chaver is the member of the rabbinic elite, where they've taken these commitments to uphold exceedingly high standards of purity. So the wife of the Chaver, who follows the standards, she can lend to the Amaretz's wife, the common folk person who doesn't follow the rules of purity, and she can lend her the sieve and the other kind of sifting thing, sifter and a sieve. And you can even, no problem, you can go over and you can do the work with her, because at that point, when it's all, we'll explain in a second, at that point when it's all dry, there's nothing can become impure. So there's nothing to worry about. So go over and help her. And so here it's even better. Lend her the thing, go help her, have a good chat, talk about the news, the kids, whatever. Carry on a good, healthy relationship with your neighbor. And again, you see the way the mission is formulated is what it's saying is, we want you to go as far as you can go. So if all you can do is lend her the thing before you run into actually participating in transgression, so you just lend her the thing. If you can actually go over and help her grind the stuff without transgressing anything, even better, do that. Aval mishatatil hamayim. But once the water is placed, the grain becomes wet. So the rule is, in general, produce, once it becomes wet with intentionally placed water, that's when it can become impure. So then if you make the grain wet and then it comes into contact with a rodent, so then that will render the produce impure, whereas before it becomes wet, if the rodent touches it, it doesn't. So once the water is in play, lo tiga esla, you don't touch anything with her. You stand back. She'ein machzikin yidei over ever. Because, and here's the positive principle of the negative injunction, we do not actively give strength to machzik. We don't support the hands of transgressors. So here again, look, we're not saying these people are enemies. We're not saying they're bad or dirty or you need to be far away from them. No, lend them your things. And if you can, go over to their house and work in their kitchen, help them out. Be good friends, be good neighbors to them. But you've got to draw a line at actually participating in the transgression. So that you hold. And then the Mishnah says, "V'kulan lo amru elam mimnei darkei shalom." All of he says in all of this, it seems to be saying, or at least in the license, maybe even just the. I like to read it as both sides. Actually, I think the standard way of reading this is, excuse me, the standard way of reading this is that it's the specifically the license portion, the license component of this Mishnah that says that you're allowed to lend them the thing and you're allowed to help them with the grinding so long as it's not going to become impure. That's Mimnei Darkei Shalom because of the ways of peace. Because the Torah puts high value on peace and kindness and goodness. And so we want to allow that. And so we allow this. But I actually think it may be the case that the Mishnah, or at least I would like it to be the case, that the Mishnah means this in both directions. Also, the setting of boundaries. And the saying is that in saying that I will go this far but not further because these values are still important to me, and they're important to me even as I'm trying to engage in constructive, friendly, peaceful relationship with you. And then both of our knowing, each side knowing that you have your boundaries and I have my boundaries, and that's okay. We're all allowed to have that, and we should communicate openly and say like, these are the things I'm willing to do, these are the things I'm not. And I show you that I care about you because I'm willing to go pretty far. I'm not a fanatic. I'm not saying I can't be in your house. I'm not saying I can't lend you things. I want to be your friend. I want to be your neighbor, but I can't actually participate in the grinding once it becomes wet. Both sides of that, I think, are critical components of cultivating, sustaining, achieving friendship across difference. And just in general, we're trying to build good relationships. It's important to be able to, you need to be able to take some risks, be a little somewhat vulnerable and open and in a new space, in their space, allow them into your space. And there needs to be some of that discomfort. But also, especially as things develop, you need to say, okay, but here's my line for now. And then in general, you need everyone to say, like, I've got my values and you've got your values, and we can do a lot of amazing work together. And I can compromise a lot, but I'm precisely able to compromise on what I can compromise on precisely because I refuse to compromise on the rest, and vice versa on both sides. So I just find this to be both a beautiful and I just think a powerfully fertile model for thinking about pluralism, community, and also just, again, for thinking about good, healthy relationships between two people. Okay. I'm going to do the last piece here, which is really, I'm just going to do a brief section of it. It's a beautiful drasha from the passage in Psikta de Rav Kahana. This is an early midrash. Most midrashim follow the order of the scriptural books. So you'll have Midrash Rabbah on Breshit and Midrash Rabbah on Shemot, or Tanchuma on Chumash. And it just goes verse by verse, or just whatever they commented on in the order of the Parshiot. Psikta de Rav Kahana is in the Psikta Rabbati, is like interrelated books, are calendrically structured. So every special distinctive reading in the liturgical cycle gets its own section in the Psikta rabbinic commentary. It's an amazing resource because you get like you get the perspective from the people who created the liturgical calendar. You get their perspective on what's going on at each moment. So here, this is from the Psikta on Bachodesh HaShlishi. We read on Shavuot. Is the account of the giving of the Torah. And it's important to know, so it's in Parshas Yitro. If you read Parshas Yitro, so you get there's a story where Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, shows up at the Israelite camp. It's unclear, it's debated exactly when this happens in the chronology. But if you just read the Chumash in order, so Yitro shows up, he's greeted by Moshe, there's a whole exchange. Yitro is very upset that his son-in-law is working too hard. He says, why are you judging everyone on your own? It's crazy. It's too much for you. It's not good for you. It's not good for them. Maybe you should install a system of judges and a court system so you don't have to do all the work yourself. They get that done. And then it seems to say, that Yitro goes home, and then there's a just clean break with no transition, and it says B'chodesh Hashlishi, O Midbar Sinai, in the 3rd month, the Jewish people came to Sinai, and then it is the story of the Aseret Adibros. And so the Midrash is just working through like what that juxtaposition is between the Yisro story and what the clean break of like B'chodesh Hashlishi is about, just what's happening there. So the Midrash says, what happened just above this, I mean, just above the account of the giving of the Torah? Parshas Yitro. That's what happened just before. Where it says Yisro told Moshe, you should find from among the people, people of excellent character who can stand in your stead and help you out with the administration of people. And then immediately after, it just says in the 3rd month. So here's the rabbinic drasha. Amar Shlomo. King Solomon says in Mishlei, Lev Yodea Marat Nafsha. Says that the heart, only the heart knows the bitterness of its soul. And this is actually cited in Maseches Yoma for the principle that no matter what the doctors say, if a woman on Yom Kippur, a pregnant woman, says that she needs to eat on Yom Kippur for her health and for her safety, whatever, even if the doctors say it's not necessary, we listen to her, because only the individual's heart knows the pain in its own depths. There's a pain is personalizing. It can also be isolating, because no one else can truly feel the depth of and the poignancy of pain within your own soul, the individual's own soul. But then the second half of the verse, and the Midrash adds a lefikach. It says, and therefore, precisely because only the individual heart can know the bitterness of their soul, therefore, v'simchato lo yitarev zar. Therefore, a foreigner cannot participate in its joy, in the joy of the heart. So what does this mean? The foreigner cannot participate in the joy of the heart. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Yisrael hayu meshubadim batita v'levenim u'mitzrayim. The Jewish people in Egypt were in bondage, they were enslaved, and they were working under terrible conditions with plaster and bricks in Egypt, and they were in pain. They were hurting. It's a terrible time. V'yitro, Yoshe b'toch beito, hashkei v'vetach. Yitro is at home in Midian, and he's fine. He's doing great. No problem at all. I don't think this is a critique of Yitro. There's no reason Yitro should have come to Egypt. There was nothing he was going to do to help. No difference he could have made. But still, it says Yitro, while the people were suffering, Yitro was at home in Midian doing just totally fine. Uvali wrote B'simchas Torah, and then he imbanai, and then God says, and now he shows up when everything is great, and they're going to receive the Torah. And he wants to be a part of the simcha, the joy and celebration of receiving the Torah, and be a part of the positive mission and values and meaning and aspiration that's going to come out of this moment, and that level of joy. Lefikach, therefore, v'yishlach Moshe. Moshe sends him away. He sends away his father-in-law. Or this is like the biggest professional achievement of Moshe's life. It's the height of his career. You should want his father-in-law there to see. He's finally reached the pinnacle of success. He's getting the Torah in front of the entire people. It's like his big day, and he tells his father-in-law to go home. Why? Because if you weren't there in the hard times, you can't be there in the good times. In order to be a part of what this nation is going to be about, to be a part of the Torah, you have to have participated and suffer in the suffering alongside everyone else, because you have to know what that means. You have to know the depth of community and the identity that comes from shared suffering and the togetherness that you build through common plight. And so I just wanted to leave everyone with a thought that so many of the debates we have, the arguments we have, the disagreements we have, when we're thinking rightly, so many of these disagreements turn out to be fundamentally superficial. because what really matters, as Jewishly, is what Soloveitchik called the just the community, or the covenant of fate. Just we're all Jews, and we have a common history, and we've all suffered together for millennia. And that's the ground of our identity. There's a lot more. It's not the entirety of our identity. It's also the Torah, there's the mitzvah, and there's what we hope to do and accomplish, and the mission we have in the world. But most basically, we're all Jews because we were all in Egypt together, and then we were all in Europe together, or in the Middle East. And when it comes down to it, the bad guys of the world aren't going to distinguish between, well, you have the right views, you have the base Hillel views, you have the base Shammai views. No, we're all Jews. That's fundamental. But then also on a personal, interpersonal, communal level, the most important thing we can do to cultivate solidarity and unity is not, in the first place, achieving consensus on either ideology or practice. The most fundamental, basic, vital, important thing we can do is show up for each other when things are hard. And when somebody on the other side of the aisle is suffering, if I am there for them and they're there for me, then it will turn out that what disagreements we have, they may persist, they may be real, and they may be important, but they will come into proper relief as fundamentally superficial in comparison to the depth of our commitment to each other and our community and solidarity in care for each other's pain. With that, I see 9:29 on the clock. Thank you all so much. Thank you again to Drisha. Thank you to Chaya. I don't know if we have time. I see there's something in the chat here. Seems to me there are two different modes of pluralism for this course. One is about different ways of doing the same thing with maximal trust for looking out for each other. Perhaps how we think about different nagim against firm Jews, and more hierarchical, where they're more religious and less religious, and the pluralism is always from the point of view of the more religious, and the peace the more religious can offer to less. But it's not really about having clear and open communication, and as you suggested, it's perhaps easier without that clear explanation. I think especially it's incisive and insightful and clear. I think part of it is a question of just the I was going to say the paucity of the sources, but it's also it's the perspective of the sources, and the method of employing here, where obviously the Mishnah and the legal codes are going to be written from the perspective of the champions of the legal codes, and we don't get the Amma Haaretz's point of view. But I do think I'm suggesting that the ethic could be turned around, because the Amma Haaretz, some of them may realize from the rabbinic perspective, like, yeah, we're just deficient Jews, and there are a lot of Jews out there who think of themselves that way, but there are also a lot of very proud Jews who have divergent practices, and from their perspective, just using the Orthodox, non-Orthodox, we're going to stick with that. So there are a lot of liberal Jews who think the Orthodox Jews are doing terrible things and are messed up. And the hierarchy can be reversed. And I think part of achieving a genuine pluralism is realizing and appreciating that the hierarchy can go both ways. And then knowing that we're each engaging reciprocally and mutually in the same kinds of procedures and maneuvers. It was a very important comment. Thank you. Okay. Chaya, any final?
All right. I just wanted to give a moment, but it doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So I will say thank you so much to everyone who joined us, and thank you so much, Rabbi Ozar, for this series. I think we all really enjoyed and benefited, and that's such an important topic, and you've dealt with it. So to me, it was a very refreshing sort of approach to these questions that I hadn't sort of encountered before, and I really enjoyed. With a slight exception of a class that you gave, I think a couple of months ago, also for Dream. But I've been really enjoying this approach and these sources. And thank you so much. And again, thank you to everyone who has been joining us. And I would like to invite you all to join our upcoming classes. This Sunday, we have this Sunday, which is April 7th at 12 p.m. Is that true? No, that's the following Sunday.
No, I know
Okay,
it's not true
sorry.
because my daughter's birthday is April 2nd, and she keeps reminding us that it's next Friday or
That's cute.
something.
How old
Yeah,
is she turning?
5.
Oh, that's so sweet. Um, so April 7th, which is not next week, we will be having the 25th annual Rappaport Memorial Lecture, which will be with Rabbi David Silver, who will be teaching on the topic of the Seder ritual and the formation of community. And you can sign up at rappaport.drisha.org. And we're continuing with Mishnah in Depth with Nazir and Sota with Rabbi Avi Walfish, which is also starting on April 7th at Sundays at 1:30 p.m. Oh, and following that will be 1 p.m. every Sunday. And we've got a whole bunch. I don't think I'm allowed to tell you guys yet, but I am so excited for the slate of classes that we have for during Sphera. So once those are public knowledge, be excited now. And once they're public knowledge, look them up and sign up because they're going to be so good. So I'm so excited for those. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Rabbi Ozar. And hopefully we'll get to learn with you again soon.
Okay.
Good
Thank
night.
you, everybody. Thank you.
And have everyone a happy and kosher Pesach.
Bye.